I wasn't invited to the meeting where the company was saved, but I was the one who made the call that saved it. That fall, the leaves in Charlotte never quite turned. They just curled and browned like they were too tired for ceremony. I remember watching them from the conference room window because that's where I was the day the city grant came through. The Whitaker and Langston group was bleeding. The 2008 crash had gutted the housing market, and by the time my father's health began to decline, our company was holding more half-finished historical restorations than cash flow. My brother Chase had moved to New York by then, building something he called a brand ecosystem around urban futurism. He gave TED Talks and launched a podcast about smart cities that fizzled after 6 episodes. I, meanwhile, had been running a modest architectural firm in Boston focusing on sustainable restoration. Nothing flashy. But when the call came, Dad's in the hospital, the board's nervous, we're hemorrhaging clients, I didn't hesitate. I came home. No title. No guarantees. Just a stack of NDAs, a half-finished grant proposal, and the voice of our head of finance saying, "Thank God you're here, Avery." For 3 years, I rebuilt quietly. I renegotiated our contracts with the Preservation Societies, secured a federal revitalization grant, and pushed the city to back our culturally significant projects with tax support. The W&L that had been circling the drain was breathing again. Chase would visit now and then, take a few photos for his social media, shake hands at groundbreakings. He was always introduced as Samuel Whitaker's son. I was just Avery from operations. I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was that we hadn't lost the historic district redevelopment. What mattered was that the board didn't dissolve the firm. And truthfully, I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted the work to be done right. Still, sometimes when I stayed late in my father's office to finish budgeting reports, I'd pause at his desk. On the far right corner, nestled between 2 legal pads, sat a framed photo of me at 8 years old. I was wearing a hard hat 2 sizes too big. One hand clutching my father's thumb at a dusty job site. He'd always kept that photo there. I never asked why. One evening, about 2 years into my return, we hit a major milestone. The Jefferson Row project had finally passed inspection after months of delays. I stayed late with the team to send out final compliance reports and called the press team about a quiet write-up in the Charlotte Ledger. Nothing major, just something the community could see. The next morning, there was a press release. It quoted my father thanking the vision of our next generation and praised Chase for inspiring us to look forward, not back. There was no mention of my name. I reread the paragraph 3 times. It felt like my body was somewhere else entirely. Not angry, just floating. That week, we hosted a small investor dinner at the Columns, our family estate now rented for events. I came early to help set up. I was adjusting a framed rendering of our latest project when I looked over at the main table. The centerpiece had been replaced. Where my childhood photo once sat on my father's desk, now stood a glossy 11 and 14 of Chase shaking hands with the mayor at a tech conference. Smiling, confident, lit perfectly. I didn't say a word. I just excused myself and took a walk behind the garden. I leaned against the stone wall my great-grandfather once laid by hand and listened to the wind run through bare branches. And for the first time in years, I wondered if the work wasn't enough, what would be. It started with the parking spot, the one outside the downtown office building marked with a small white sign, Reserved, C. Whitaker. I paused when I saw it. That spot had been empty for months. No one used it, not even visiting contractors. I still took the garage across the street like I always had. When I walked in, Chase was in the lobby shaking hands with someone from Langston Bank. He smiled like he'd been here all along. "Hey, sis," he said, clapping me on the shoulder like I was just another guest at the party. "You should have seen the light in Dad's eyes when I told him I was coming back full-time." That afternoon, the internal email went out, excited to announce that Chase Whitaker will be stepping in as Chief Innovation Officer. Innovation. A word that says everything and nothing. He moved fast. Within weeks, our office was filled with branding consultants, digital experience strategists, and young analysts who kept saying words like gamify the heritage experience. They pitched augmented reality walkthroughs of the Jefferson Row project, QR codes on bricks, a subscription newsletter called Living the Legacy. I asked for a private meeting. "I'm not against modernization," I said, But we built trust by honoring the past. We promised these communities respect, not spectacle. He smiled like I was being sentimental. You've been amazing with the groundwork, Avery. Seriously. But the city's moving forward. People want story, not just structure. When I brought it up to our father later, he patted my hand and said, "You're the stable one. Let your brother try. Let him try." I remembered when trying meant learning zoning laws, sitting through neighborhood council meetings, waking up at 5 a.m. to argue with suppliers over reclaimed wood prices. I watched as Chase turned in proposals that read like tech manifestos. He pitched to private investors for projects that hadn't been scoped. He redirected funds from one restoration to sponsor a sleek video campaign called The New South Speaks, complete with drone footage and a soundtrack that sounded like a Levi's commercial. One afternoon, our finance director slipped into my office visibly uneasy. He signed off on a 6-figure production package, Avery. It wasn't even reviewed by the board. I sent a formal inquiry to Dad. No reply. 3 days later, I was removed from the email thread for investor correspondence. That Friday, I came in early. I went to the archives, the small project records room where we kept every permit, every meeting note, every community letter from the past decade. I pulled out the original grant proposal I'd written for the Franklin Theater renovation. The paper was soft at the edges. I could still see the ink mark where I'd bled my pen through in frustration after 3 straight revisions. It was the kind of document no one would ever frame, but it had held a company together. As I slid it back into the sleeve, something caught my eye on the upper shelf. A dusty stack of proposal folders labeled Deferred. Projects I'd fought for. Sites that had meaning, cultural, not commercial. I took one and opened it the Henderson Library, a former Black literacy school turned community center. Chase had scrapped it last week, said it wasn't scalable. I sat on the floor with that file in my lap and asked myself quietly, when did doing the right thing start meaning so little? The invitation came in a soft cream envelope sealed with the company crest, Whitaker and Langston Founders Dinner, honoring the next generation. I already knew what it was. The dinner was held at the Columns, our family's historic estate, now used for board events and high-end fundraisers. I'd restored it myself, negotiated every window permit, chose the paint that matched the original 1894 finish, even rescued the rotting cornices with my own hands. And now I was to attend as a guest. When I arrived, Chase was already holding court beneath the chandelier, his tie slightly undone for effect. A branded banner hung behind him, Building the Future Whitaker Next. I froze at the phrase. No and Langston. Just Whitaker. Dinner was served under a tent of fairy lights. I was placed at a side table with retired board members and a few junior consultants. The main table where my father sat had an empty chair. For a moment, I thought it was mine. But just before speeches began, Chase walked up behind my father and took that seat. The photographer snapped a photo. And when they toasted to the new chapter, no one looked in my direction. The speech was short. My father stood slowly, voice thinner than I remembered, but clear. Tonight is about legacy, he said, and about the courage to look ahead. I built this company on tradition, but the future belongs to those who can reimagine it. He placed a hand on Chase's shoulder. This is the right hand's now. Chase understands what's next. The crowd applauded. I didn't, because I was too busy replaying the phrasing in my head. The right hands. Later, as guests mingled, I slipped back into the main house. Into the room that used to be our father's study. Everything had been rearranged. The books I'd cataloged for the Preservation Fund had been boxed. My notes on the Lincoln Mill project were gone. And on the desk sat a sleek silver plaque, Chase Whitaker, Chief Innovation Officer. I opened the center drawer. My old project ledger was still there, creased, marked, held together by habit. But on top of it sat something else, the Jefferson Row plans rebranded with a new logo. WHTKR in bold all caps. A startup-style typeface. No heritage, no soul. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just placed the old Franklin Theater proposal creased edges and all on top of the WHTKR folder, and I closed the drawer. I left before dessert. No one noticed. And as I walked past the reflecting pool in the back courtyard, I paused for just a second. The surface was still. The lights from inside flickered across it. For a moment, it looked like fire trapped under glass. I thought of something my grandfather used to say. If you're not at the table, make sure you know who said it. That night, I wasn't at the table, but I knew exactly who had built it. 3 weeks after the dinner, I got a call from Marisol, a city planner I used to work with back when we were fighting to save Henderson Library. "I thought you left," she said, her voice low, "but I figured you should know. We're being bombarded with rezoning requests tied to your family name." I didn't respond right away. She continued, "It's that smart city parcel on East 6th. They're trying to rush it through council approval, but none of the community orgs have signed off." I closed my laptop. The last time I'd seen that site proposal, it was still conceptual. Historic textile district, high foot traffic, fragile zoning, and deeply, deeply protected. By the end of the month, my inbox was full of auto-forwarded threads, lawsuits, protests, anonymous leaks from staffers who were quitting mid-project. One subject line read simply, "WHTKR accused of misleading investors." I never opened them. I didn't need to, because I knew exactly where the cracks would appear. Chase had taken what we built stable, meticulous, painful, and turned it into a pitch deck. He'd promised impact studies before breaking ground, lied about permits, pulled in venture capital from out-of-state tech firms that thought revitalization meant putting a touchscreen kiosk next to a bronze plaque, and now it was unraveling. The city council froze the East 6th project. The mayor distanced herself in a statement. Former clients pulled out of the downtown renovations entirely. The worst came in the form of a photo. A friend texted it to me, no caption. Just an image taken outside the columns on a Thursday afternoon. Empty parking lot, overgrown hedges, a faded banner half unhooked from the gate flapping sideways in the wind. No people, no lights, just a name slowly being reclaimed by weather. My father had a minor stroke the day the council vote went public. Chase flew to Denver to meet with backers. I stayed home, not because I didn't care, but because I understood something no one else in that family ever seemed to learn. When a house collapses, you don't run back inside just because you helped build it. That weekend, I drove past the columns one last time. I didn't go in. I just parked across the street and watched as a cleaning crew loaded remnants into a van, centerpieces, folding chairs, unused signage. Then I saw her. Clarice, the groundskeeper's wife, who'd been there since I was a child. She was pulling weeds at the front gate, her back to me. I almost rolled down the window, almost called her name. But I didn't, because I didn't want to hear the question in her voice. Where were you when it all fell apart? That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the proposal folder from Henderson Library. I hadn't opened it in over a year. Inside was a copy of a community letter signed by 32 families asking for our help. It had coffee stains across the margins, my notes in pencil, the edges curled from heat exposure left too close to the radiator, probably during one long night. It was without exaggeration the best thing we never got to do. So I picked up the phone. Not to call my father, not Chase, but someone else, someone who still believed in what restoration meant. And the next morning I sent a package. No return address, no note. Just 3 things: a copy of the original Henderson proposal, a flash drive with my full audit of Chase's zoning violations. A single line handwritten in blue ink legacy isn't what you say you're building. It's what survives when your name fades. 6 months later, the old Henderson Library opened its doors again. Not with a ribbon cutting, not with headlines or news cameras. Just a quiet email to neighborhood groups and a paper flyer pinned to church bulletin boards, community resource space, now open, welcome back. People came with folding chairs, secondhand books, and stories. They didn't know my name, and that was the point. I had used the last of my savings and a quiet buy-in from 2 preservation nonprofits to form a new initiative. No branding, no marble signage, just a 4-word mission: respect the people first. The building kept its scars: exposed brick from the original foundation, uneven flooring from where the roof had sagged for years. We didn't fix the past, we honored it, and slowly people showed up. Single mothers looking for tutoring space, a retired architect who wanted to teach hand drafting again, a girl with pink headphones who sat in the same chair every Tuesday just to read in silence. No one asked who owned the place, and I didn't offer it, because it didn't matter. One rainy afternoon I received a letter. It was from my father. The envelope was thin handwriting shaky. Avery, I don't know how to begin. I know you tried to protect what I built, and I know I didn't see you. Not fully. They tell me Chase is under investigation. I haven't heard from him. I miss the sound of your heels in the hall. I miss your order. If you're willing to talk, the door is open. Dad. I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because some doors aren't meant to be reopened. Some are meant to remain exactly as they are closed with silence on the other side. Weeks later, I ran into Clarice at the farmer's market. She asked if I'd heard that WHTKR was officially shut down. The assets were being liquidated, the staff released. They said the leadership collapsed, she said, voice flat. Said there was no direction. I nodded. She looked at me for a long time, then asked gently, "Did you ever get your photo back?" I smiled, because I hadn't, but I'd framed something else. Inside the Henderson building in the back reading room, I'd hung a photo I'd found buried in the archives. Not of me, of my grandmother. She was standing on scaffolding sleeves rolled pencil behind her ear, pointing at a column during a church renovation in 1965. No hard hat, no clipboard, just resolve. She'd never been credited for her work, but she was there. I placed a small plaque under the frame she built before they let her sign. In that moment, I understood I wasn't rebuilding their legacy. I was reclaiming my own, and I didn't need a crest or a nameplate or a headline to do it. I just needed bricks, light, a key that turned in the door every morning, and people who remembered what had been lost and felt seen in what had returned. Avery never issued a press release. She never went on a podcast or wrote a tell-all or claimed the company wronged her. She didn't have to, because there in the middle of the city stood a building she'd saved. It spoke for her. And it said more than Chase ever could. It was autumn again in Charlotte. The trees turned properly this time, rich ochres and reds, like they were finally allowed to feel everything at once. I visited the columns one last time, not to go in, just to stand across the street across time and look. The estate was quiet. The building had been repossessed and was waiting to be bought. The WHTKR lettering had been peeled from the main gate, leaving behind faint outlines, ghosts of a name that was never meant to last. But someone had cleaned the walkway. The hedges had been trimmed. And right by the entrance, affixed to the iron fence with 4 quiet bolts, was something new. A bronze plaque. Clean. Simple. No flourish. It read, "Originally restored under the oversight of Avery Whitaker, whose contribution was not listed in public record. This correction is permanent. I hadn't put it there. I never found out who did." Weeks later, a friend texted me a photo. The plaque had been shared in a local preservation blog. No context, just the image and a caption. Some legacies survive even when you erase the name. Back at Henderson, the first children's art class started in the basement studio. Paper leaves taped to the wall, crayons everywhere, tiny shoes kicked under tables. I stood in the hallway as they painted. One girl asked if she could use the color gold for the roof, even though the real one was black. I told her she could. She smiled like it was the first time anyone had said yes. I stayed a while longer that day. Before I left, I walked to the back room where my grandmother's photo still hung. I reached out and straightened the frame just slightly. Then, I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped outside. No press followed. No interviews came. But the building stayed lit, the key stayed warm, and the truth stayed in place. I didn't leave a note, didn't file a trademark, didn't correct the record in print. I didn't need to. Because the legacy didn't need to be loud, it just needed to be real. If your name was never on the wall, but your hands built the house, just leave a single mark below.